Welcome to Beyond the Call, where history, leadership, and heroism come alive. Today's story explores Private Ova Kelley at Buri Airstrip on Leyte in 1944, a powerful account of courage and responsibility in combat. If you enjoy learning more about military history and extraordinary individuals, you can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. On a single morning in the Pacific, one quiet infantryman made a decision that turned a stalled attack into a breakthrough, at the cost of his own life. Before we continue, I want to mention the Medal of Honor book series that accompanies this work. These books tell the stories of America's Medal of Honor recipients in a serious, readable, and historically grounded format, with each volume focused on a specific campaign, battle, or part of the war. They are available in color paperback, Kindle ebook, and matching audiobook editions. You can find them at militaryauthor.me. The story begins on the Philippine island of Leyte during the campaign to drive Japanese forces from the archipelago. American troops were pushing inland from the beaches, fighting through jungle, rice paddies, and small villages toward airfields and road networks the enemy could not afford to lose. One of those objectives was the Buri Airstrip, a stretch of flat ground turned into a defensive knot of trenches, craters, and concealed firing positions. Company A of the 382nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 96th Infantry Division, was ordered to seize that ground. It was just one company among many in the larger battle, yet the events that unfolded there would be remembered across the division and, later, across the country. Before that day, Ova Arthur Kelley was not a famous name. He had been born in the small town of Norwood, Missouri, in 1914, growing up amid farms, dirt roads, and close-knit families that weathered the lean years between world wars. As a young man, he moved west, and by 1943 he was living in San Francisco, watching the global conflict grow closer with each headline. That October he enlisted in the United States Army, trading civilian life for a rifle, a uniform, and the hard discipline of basic training. In a matter of months, he learned to march, shoot, dig in, and trust the men around him, preparing for a kind of combat no training area could fully reproduce. Beyond the Call is the Monday feature of Dispatch, U.S. Military History magazine. Kelley joined Company A as the division deployed across the Pacific. Long voyages by troopship ended in the heat and uncertainty of forward staging areas, then in the shock of combat landings. On Leyte, the regiment fought through mud and monsoon rains, facing an enemy that used every fold of the ground to delay and bleed the advance. By early December, Kelley and his comrades were part of a push toward the Buri Airstrip, a vital piece of terrain whose capture would deny the enemy a base and open greater room for American operations. The night before the attack, men checked weapons, adjusted web gear, and tried to rest, knowing that morning would bring exposure on open ground. At first light on December 8th, Company A moved out toward the airstrip. The terrain ahead was treacherous in its simplicity, a stretch of open ground broken by shell holes, shallow depressions, and a drainage ditch where Japanese troops had dug in. As the company advanced, heavy rifle and machine gun fire erupted from those positions, cutting through the thin mist and forcing the Americans down. In seconds, the open approach became a killing zone. Any soldier who tried to move from his shallow scrape of earth drew a fresh burst of fire that chewed up the soil around him. The company was pinned, caught short of the objective with no easy way forward and no safe path back. The commander called for mortars, and high explosive rounds arced overhead to crash into the enemy line. One machine gun was knocked out, but the remaining weapons kept the field covered, and the riflemen of Company A found themselves hugging the ground, listening to the slap of bullets in the mud and the calls of wounded men. Time was working against them. As the sun climbed, visibility would improve, and Japanese gunners would enjoy an even clearer view of every movement on that open strip of land. In that tense pause, the ordinary instincts of self-preservation told every man to stay low and hope for a different plan. Kelley lay in his own shallow foxhole, feeling the concussion of nearby bursts and the weight of that helpless stillness. He could see the enemy positions less than 100 yards away, hunkered in bomb craters, and along the ditch, their fire ruling the ground. He also knew that as long as they held those holes, his company could not move, and more of his friends would be hit. In that moment, he did something that no order demanded and no training manual prescribes. He gathered an armload of grenades, cradling them against his chest, and rose out of cover to attack alone. It was a choice that defied common sense, but answered a deeper sense of duty. Kelley moved forward across the open field under direct fire, running in a crouch, then dropping to one knee to pull pins and hurl grenades. Each throw had to be accurate, landing in the mouth of a crater or along its lip where enemy helmets appeared. Explosions blossomed among the Japanese positions, tearing up dirt and smashing weapons. The defenders tried to cut him down, firing bursts that traced the line of his advance, but he kept going, using shell holes for brief cover and then pushing on again. With every blast, another part of the once solid line faltered, and the cohesion that made the position so deadly began to break. As the surviving Japanese soldiers started to fall back from their shattered craters, Kelley adapted to the new shape of the fight. He grabbed an abandoned M1 rifle, stood upright on the torn ground he had just cleared, and began firing into the retreating enemy. His shots were measured and deliberate, dropping several soldiers who were attempting to regroup farther back. When the rifle ran empty and its clips sprang free, he let it fall and picked up a lighter carbine from another body, continuing to fire as the enemy tried to escape. One man had turned the tables, turning what had been a safe defensive hub into a deadly place to be a defender. From their foxholes, the men of Company A watched this one-man assault unfold. They saw Kelley cross ground they believed impassable, survive bursts of fire that should have killed him, and then stand exposed to deliver accurate shots into the retreating enemy. That sight broke the paralysis that had gripped them. Officers and non-commissioned officers shouted to move, and the company surged forward. Dozens of soldiers rose and ran across the same deadly field, now covered by their own fire and by the confusion Kelley had created. In a rush, they overran the weakened position, killing many of the remaining defenders and capturing several machine guns that had dominated the approach only minutes before. The impact of that charge went beyond a single ditch line. With the enemy strongpoint smashed, Company A and the rest of the attacking force were able to press on toward the Buri Airstrip itself. Kelley, still at the front, joined in that continued advance, determined to exploit the breach he had opened. The ground around the airfield was still dangerous, littered with concealment for snipers and small groups of holdouts. As the soldiers pushed over a small rise near the airstrip, a hidden marksman fired a shot that struck Kelley and brought him down. His comrades moved past to secure the objective, but they later carried him to the rear with a wound that would prove fatal. In the official Medal of Honor citation that followed, these events are captured in compressed, formal language. Phrases like "on his own initiative" and "outstanding courage, aggressiveness, and initiative" stand in for the raw reality of one man rising alone under fire. The citation notes how his grenades killed or wounded several defenders and threw the rest into a disorganized rout, which in practical terms meant stunned men, stumbling out of craters they believed safe. It records how his deliberate rifle fire struck down retreating soldiers and how his example inspired his company to charge. The document draws a straight line from that personal decision to the success of the attack on the enemy position. The broader significance of Kelley's action can be seen at several levels. Tactically, he broke a stalemate that threatened to cost many lives and stall the advance on vital ground. Operationally, his company's success helped open the way for continued attacks that would secure Leyte and, in time, the rest of the Philippines, cutting Japanese access to crucial resources. Morally, his story underscores how battles often hinge on the courage of individuals who refuse to accept paralysis in the face of deadly odds. A pinned company became an advancing wave again because one private refused to stay in his hole. That is why his name appears in histories of the campaign, even though he never rose above the lowest enlisted rank. Kelley's life did not extend beyond that winter in 1944. He died of his wounds 2 days after the fight at Buri at the age of 30, never knowing that his name would be inscribed among Medal of Honor recipients. After the war, his remains were brought home and buried at Oak Grove Cemetery near Norwood, reconnecting a distant Pacific battlefield with the quiet Missouri landscape of his youth. In 1945, the Medal of Honor was awarded to him posthumously, and in early 1946, a ceremony at Norwood High School brought that decoration into the hands of his family. His young son received the medal from a general in a gymnasium filled with neighbors who had known Art Kelley long before he became a national hero. Today, Kelley's legacy lives in multiple forms. His grave offers a place for reflection, reminding visitors that global wars ultimately touch individual families and hometowns. His name appears in unit histories and in lists of Medal of Honor recipients, where students of military history can trace how a single act of initiative changed the course of a small but costly fight. For infantry soldiers learning their craft, his story is a case study in courage, responsibility, and the power of example under fire. Remembering him as a man with a home, a family, and a final choice on a muddy airstrip keeps his story human and real. It reminds us that going beyond the call is never an abstract ideal, but always a decision made by a person with everything to lose.